08 p.m. And if we could stand and salute the flag, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. I would like to recommend to amend tonight's agenda by removing 10H. Do I have a first?
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler. Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler?
Approved.
Mr. Nichols?
Approved.
And Mrs. Pugh?
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approving tonight's agenda as amended.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend the approval of the minutes of the Board of Education regular meeting of August the 20th, 2023.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recognition of guest.
Welcome, everybody. Our first guest this evening, I have the privilege of introducing her. For those of you who do not know, she serves as our high school teacher academy instructor, and she has one of the most important jobs you can have in education these days. She's preparing us all for the future, and what a job she is doing. I'm gonna let her share that with you. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in giving a hand to Mrs. Amy Hamby.
Good evening. I am going to be brief. The last time I was up here, I was actually begging for money to take 5 of my students to Florida. The 5 that got the opportunity to go to Florida were the ones who placed first at the Delaware State competition in March. We got the money, we went to Florida, had a good time and very, very successful time as well. First, I would like to acknowledge my ethical dilemma team. Well, 2 of them are going off to college, but one is here. They placed 8 out of 10, in the top 10 out of about 30 other groups. They placed 8. So I would like to recognize Jessica Price. I think she is in the audience. Did you stay here, Jessica? So in the first time in the history of the Educators Rising, I thought I made history by having 5 placed first at the state level, but we really outdid ourselves in Florida. For the first time in the history, we had a student place first in the nation in a competition that, it was the very first time it was a competition. It was the children's literature K through 3 Spanish category. What she had to do was she had to write a children's literature story. She had to illustrate it. It had to be about teaching a lesson. She went in, she read it to the judges just like she would have read it to a kindergarten to 3rd grade teacher, all in Spanish. Out of 40 participants across the country, we had a first place, and I'd like to present and publicly recognize Gala Milana for placing first in the nation. Could you join me along with her family? Along with her family, Syria.
Yeah, way to go.
Gala, on behalf of Laurel Board of Education and this whole town of Laurel, we'd like to present you with the first place award in the nation for children's literature K through Spanish. And Gala's got to come back here and teach us part of the deal, right, Gala?
This is cool. Okay.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening to the Board of Education. I'm coming up here tonight because I'm very excited. It's like a dream come true. Because usually there's not as many people in this room, and here we're going to celebrate together tonight for one of the most important things that we do, and which is read. So over the summer, we had a program for students to compete and to read as many books as they could, and it was called the Bulldog Sora Summer Reading Challenge. Now, that's a mouthful, but here's the thing. Not a lot of good things happened from COVID. But there's one really great thing, is that there was some wonderful funding that came to our public schools. And the Laurel School District can't take credit for this. It's actually the entire state of Delaware. They purchased an app for students called Sora, which essentially is an entire access to a full library of books. Anything you could get in your local library would be available to every single student on any device they had access to at home. And that was free. It's free this year, so students all across Delaware have access to that as well. So it's a very exciting thing, and we said, hey, now that everyone has a library right at home, right in their parents' pocket with their cell phone, on their school device, how can we encourage students to read? And that became this project. So tonight we're going to have recognition of our most outstanding readers throughout the summer and some of the people that made this program a huge success. So what is Sora? You know, I could stand up here and talk exactly about what that experience is like, but hopefully some of you over the summer got a chance to see a few of our students. I wish it was all of them, but a few of our students on our social media pages or on our websites in some really great videos. And they talked about it themselves a good bit. So I'm just going to show us one of those videos to give you a little introduction into what our students were using this summer. And this is a fantastic video. And I have to do the mute thing.
Okay. Hi, my name is Victoria and I'm in first grade.
Anna, why do you like reading?
Because I get to read fictional and non-fictional. I like fiction because I think action, adventures, and like magic stuff.
I like reading because it just makes me smarter and helps me see and learn to know.
I like adventures and nature. And they can actually teach you a lot from them.
Good job. Let's talk about the app, the Sora app. What is the Sora app?
It's books. You can type in, hold it, and you can read it or you can listen to it. I like about that is that I get to listen to it because sometimes I get stuck on a word.
You can read and then you can, if you have a favorite book, you can search it up. There's also audiobooks if you're trying to read.
I like about Sora that you can get books on there because sometimes in the library there's some books they don't have, but Sora app they
like books that you might like and that are on there.
Great, so sometimes I might get a book on Sora that I can't find at my library. That's really cool. Tell me about your favorite book.
My favorite book is like Magic Tree House because there's like a lot of adventures, magic, and stuff that happens.
My favorite book is Babysitter's Club, and they have a lot of it on there. I like how it's like a comic and there's silly stuff in there and stuff, and it's like the worms all over the place. My favorite book is We Don't Eat Our Classmates. It's really funny because a dinosaur eats their classmates.
Oh my goodness, why are you participating in the summer reading challenge?
Because I just like reading and having practice.
So if you could pick any prize to win this summer for the summer reading challenge, what would you pick?
Slime, because I don't have slime, and I always like slime all the time, and I always watch.
That's all it takes, parents, just some slime.
Awesome.
Thank you. So without much further ado, we're going to call up our students who were the winners first. But before that, I'm going to need some assistance handing out those. So I'm going to call up a person who was very integral in making this all happen, and that's Miss Taisha Niblett. So if you could come on up here and assist me one more time here. And handing those out. But the one thing I did want to point out is that there was a lot of people in this community and in our school district that worked really hard to make this happen for our kids and to encourage them to be readers all summer. And I wanted to point out how much these students have actually read this year. So at North Laurel Early Learning Academy, they spent 62 hours reading this summer, and they read 431 books. So for North Laurel, I think that's pretty amazing. Laurel Elementary School spent 348 hours reading on Sora, and they read 1,561 books this summer. Laurel Middle School read 123 hours and 142 books. And Laurel High School students read for 202 hours, and they read 299 books. So there's a little something that we call in education called the summer slide. And sometimes when students go home for the summer, they stop working on their academics and they play and have fun, and we're happy that they do that, but sometimes they forget a little bit. So we thought this would be a wonderful way to keep kids engaged with reading and learning and building their skills, and it seems like it was a smashing success. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our Sora Challenge winners. Now, as a matter of speaking here, when they come up, the student can come up, and Ms. Niblett here will have a certificate for them, and then if they could just stand right here, because we're going to have an opportunity for a photo with the Board of Education, as well as some of our supporters when we're done, okay? So I'm going to begin. We'll start with Nalela, and we'll read our weekly winners and then our grand prize winner for the summer. So our weekly super readers at Nalela: Jakai Thompson, Aaliyah Gabriel, Paige Greatser. There she is. And we'll make sure they get their certificates if they couldn't make it tonight. All right. Jacob Miranda. Oh, Jacob. Riker Champlin. Johan Diaz Cano. And our grand prize winner at Nalela was Colby Graves. Oh yeah. That's the walk of a super reader if I've ever seen one. All right, now you guys sit tight. We're going to call some more classmates up. So let's go to Laurel Elementary School. Our weekly super readers were Liam Hersher, Luke Massey, Trinity Washington. Sharon Gonzalez. Brianna Miranda. Charlotte Furbe. Ezra Todd. Jacqueline Spots. Jamori Taylor Jones. Jackson Ball. Aiden Medding. Elena Bayer. Anthony Rhodes. Annalise Harold. And we have our two grand prize winners, Malcolm Long and Parker Beck. We'll take a minute here to get the elementary students organized. Might take an hour. We got it. All right, everybody get together there. There you go. All right, we're now going to move on to our secondary schools, Laurel Middle School. So our weekly winners at Laurel Middle School are Gabriel Langley, William Short, Shelley Rubio, Lucella Throckmorton, Shayla Miranda, William Short, Peyton Mangino. And our grand prize winner at Laurel Middle School was Haley Cully. All right, and now on to Laurel High School. Our weekly winners, Bailey Luter, Jorda Marina, Gian Perez, Angelina LaPlante, Sanaya Dowdy, Ashton Cornelius, Bailey Lynch, and our grand prize winner, Jessica Price. All right. I want to give a big congratulations to all of you. Thank you so much for your hard work this summer, and we are very, very proud. Now I want you to stand tight because there's a few people I want to join you for this picture. So, this program wouldn't have happened without the dedication of course, our instructional coordinator, Ms. Taisha Niblett, who is feverishly handing out certificates. It would also not have happened for our amazing library staff in our schools and our reading specialists. They worked very hard to make sure that this program was supported, that the rewards were there for the students, and that everything was monitored. So I want to recognize them and ask them to come stand with the group of our super readers here. So our educators are, of course, Taisha Niblett and Rachel Hill, Laurel Middle High School Library. Donna Sava, is that with us tonight? Okay, she couldn't make it tonight, and then Miss Jenny Beck, reading specialist at Loyola. Come on up. So proud of this group of educators. They put a lot of time in, they didn't have to make sure this experience could happen for your students, and we're truly thankful. And
beyond our educators, we wanted to make sure that students had great incentives for making this happen. And I gotta be honest, I was really touched because, you know, I had never really asked the community for support before for an initiative we were doing. Usually our initiatives are funded already. And I needed to ask for support for this, for donations and for support for this program. And I was just floored by everyone that came out of the woodwork in this town to support these kids and lift up their reading over the summer. So I like this picture because I think that's kind of what they did for them. But I want to welcome the representatives from various civic organizations and private individuals. The first one is the Laurel Ruritan Club. Is there a representative tonight from the Ruritans Club? And if there is, please come on up and join us. Mr. Joe Downs. There you are, sir. Now, we got some big people coming up here, so we're gonna have to make some room. Sorry, Dale. I didn't mean to call you big. All right, next up, we have the Laurel Lions Club. Do we have a representative here tonight from the Laurel Lions Club? There he is. Well, you may know him, he's the mayor, Mr. John Schroed. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Miss Judy Evans, a district office employee, is she here tonight? We'll make sure she is recognized. Miss Katie and Mr. Andy Hartstein. A representative from the Laurel Women's Civic Club. Welcome, thank you. Representative from St. Philip's Episcopal Church. Mayor Shred again, a man of many connections in town here. And is there Mr. and Mrs. Paul Downs here this evening?
They are.
They are. I'd like to welcome them up here. Well, good. All right, so we've got a really full picture. So Ms. Nibblett's going to help us all squish in, and I'm going to invite the Board of Education to also join us. In fact, let's do this picture, and then the board will come in for a picture with our super readers, okay? So everybody squish in and get kind of close together so that we can get a picture of all of you, and we will make sure this picture comes out to your organizations. And kids will need your biggest smile. Like Christmas morning birthday smiles, or pizza smiles, and look at the camera. All right, guys, hold tight. Our civic supporters, you're welcome to take a seat. Thank you so much for everything you did for our students and Board of Education. If you'd like to Oh, yes. Also, our principals, if you would join us up here with your classmate, with your students who were super readers. Please come up to Mr. Brady, Miss Massey, Miss Giles, Miss Deputy. They've had lots of pictures with these kiddos, but let's get them in here. All right, one more big pizza picture, kids. Squeeze it in, everyone. Once again, I would like to thank all of our super readers, all of our educators, and especially our supporters in the community. Civic organizations and individuals will get a photo out to you guys so you can display it proudly for all the reading that got done this summer. Thank you all, and thank you to the Board of Education for recognizing these amazing students. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Oops. Okay, first I want to say, Mrs. Handy, do not forget to get this. And is Gala, is she still here? Where? I read this very quickly. Very good. Very good. Okay, we're going to skip over board participation tonight, and we're going to move right into public participation. So first I have, I believe it's, if I pronounce this right, Tracy Worthen. Is that correct, the name?
Yes.
Okay, Tracy, I want to go over the policy. So the board has afforded you the floor once during each public discussion period for a period of no more than 5 minutes. Persons wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange for a place on the board's agenda. Persons wishing to be placed on the agenda shall inform the superintendent of that desire in writing and the topic no later than 3 full working days prior to the day of the regular meeting of the board, which is normally the 3rd Wednesday of the month. Speakers may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president will have the authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that although requests may be directed to the board, action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. Mrs. Isler, as soon as you speak your first word, if you state your name, and then your time will start.
Okay, I would just like to point out that your sign-in sheet, I think it's that pink sheet right there, still says that people are permitted 5 minutes to speak.
Yes,
And you changed your
it is
policy to
5
3.
minutes.
Yeah,
You changed the policy to 3.
No, it's not changed yet.
Okay.
Tonight's the second reading of the policy.
Okay. And it says on this other paper that it's 3, but that's fine.
It's the second reading.
Okay. All right, my name is Tracy Worthen. Since the board so strictly follows certain policies, I'd like to talk about a few policies, laws, and regulations. Title 14, Chapter 41 of the Delaware Code discusses teaching of the Constitution and First Amendment protections for students. This same protection should extend to parents and other citizens who are concerned about the welfare of students. At Laurel School District, this is not the case. In fact, since a particular parent has started speaking regularly at board meetings, the board has changed its policy regarding the length of time allowed per speaker from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. The policy also states that complaints about staff are prohibited during board meetings. These rules are clearly intended to cater to the feelings and fragile egos of board members while diminishing the rights of speakers. This is an overt attempt to stifle a parent who has expressed legitimate concerns regarding school violence. Why are you so afraid of what she has to say? Rather than address the issue of school violence, the board has chosen to respond in a defensive and belligerent manner to this parent's concerns. This is both unprofessional and unconstitutional. This type of response is nothing new for this district. In an interview from December of 2021 regarding school violence, Superintendent Larimore stated, "Laurel is no different than any other school district in the state. However, for some reason, people just love to try to tread on the success of what our students are trying to accomplish here. When egotistical school board members show more concern over their reputations than the violent crimes being committed in their schools, the children in that district are not only neglected, but are blatantly put in harm's way." School districts have an obligation to educate and ensure the safety of their students. Children cannot learn when they are in fear for their safety. Students with disabilities are particularly vulnerable. Title II, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, requires that state and local government give people with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from all their programs, services, and activities. This includes public school. When the school system fails to protect a student from physical, psychological harm on school premises, they fail to protect that student's civil rights and basic human rights to feel safe and free from harm. Federal civil rights laws dictate that schools are to appropriately address issues that affect the safety and well-being of students, including bullying and harassment. The website stopbullying.gov states, The school must be an active participant responding to harassment and should take reasonable steps when crafting remedies to minimize burdens on the targeted students. When a child with a disability is bullied by the same students for years, culminating in a violent crime against the child, leaving the child unable to attend public school, it is a violation of the ADA. Furthermore, when the punishment does not fit the crime, those students are not only undeterred, but are empowered to continue bullying vulnerable students. I'll wrap this up since I thought I had a 3-minute limit. However, in this time of cancel culture, we the people cannot and will not be canceled. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Mrs. Angie Cunningham. And again, the board will allow you no more than 5 minutes. And persons wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange for a place on the board's agenda. Persons wishing to be placed on the agenda shall inform the superintendent of their desire in writing and the topic no later than 3 full working days prior to the day of the regular board meeting, which normally is the 3rd Wednesday of the month. Speakers may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. There's other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president will have the authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that although requests may be directed to the board, action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. Mrs. Cunningham, if you would state your full name and your time will start.
I do have a question first, though. During my speech, at any time you feel the need to bring up something that your attorney advised you, as you did at the last meeting, that's something that we can talk about privately, not publicly. That's my business, whatever the attorneys are discussing. So at the last meeting, you made that statement. That's private personal information. So if you feel that need to say something regarding that, that's something that needs to be addressed to me directly and not publicly. Thank you.
That was per our attorney.
I'm sorry?
That was per our attorney.
And I understand, however, that could have been privately said. There's a lot of public things I could say, I choose not to because it's not my place to. Whatever your attorney feels needs to be said, as I said, you can pull me aside and tell me privately. But I'm not asking you to address me, I'm speaking for all the children. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Angela Cunningham, and I am here tonight once again to speak on the violence that continues at the Laurel School District. Last meeting, I was told it was criticism. However, facts that are backed by evidence cannot be misconstrued as criticism. The facts are fights are already occurring in the schools. Students are already fearful to come to school and asking their parents if they can be placed out of the district or homeschooled or school choice. Staff continue to leave at an alarming high rate, including the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, a vice principal, along with several other staff members. Therefore, there are several positions that needed to be filled for the school year to even be possible. Those positions were filled with a lot of young teenage kids out of high school because the only qualification was a high school diploma. I applaud those individuals for stepping up, knowing the challenges that await them. However, our children need to be educated by qualified teachers. Laurel High School has a 10 to 14% proficiency rate in math, a 20 to 25% proficiency rate in reading. We are setting our children up for failure. These young students out of high school are still children themselves. How can they protect our children from the violence, and how can they give our children a proper education? It is our children's civil and constitutional right to have a safe learning environment and receive a proper education. What is happening in this district is an injustice to every child. And what everyone must remember, leadership is not a privilege to do less, it is a responsibility to do more. By that, we need to step up our game plan. We need to retain our qualified staff that are here, or that have been here, that held these positions that could teach our children. We cannot depend on high school children that just graduated with a high school diploma to do a proper education. Instead of focusing, though, on the level of violence and lack of qualified staff, the focus has been placed on changing policies in an attempt to silence a mother who is bold enough to stand up and speak the truth. Speakers are told to act responsibly, to maintain a high standard of conduct. Laughing at a speaker, interrupting a speaker who is exercising her First Amendment right to advocate for children, board members whispering and giggling amongst themselves, writing down notes while a speaker is speaking, is that considered a high standard of conduct? There is clearly a double standard. There is one for those who speak the truth and one for those who cannot handle the truth. The final fact, all of this is happening under current leadership. The violence continues, staff continue to leave, positions cannot be filled by qualified staff, so we must ask ourselves, why is this happening? What or who is the problem? And at the end of the day, you don't have to answer to me, but you will have to answer to someone higher than me, because your lack of empathy towards what's happening to the children is downright cruel. How would you like every day to have to come to a place that you did not feel safe? How would you like to be educated by someone who just stepped out of high school? How would you like to every day know that there's a possibility you could be assaulted by simply walking down a hall to go to class to receive an education? I do not think anyone sitting at that table would like to have to worry about that, but our children do every single day. And for months, this has been brought to the attention. On TikTok, the fights in Laurel have had 7.2 million views alone, and that's for the Laurel School District. That is telling you something. When there are so many videos out there of Laurel School District fights that are posted on social media, there are 7.2 million views. That is a problem. This is a little town. There should not be that many fights. Something should be done. Many children do not have an advocate that will speak up for them, so therefore I will continue to speak up for the children. And they are not granted the privilege to have policies changed to protect them. They have to deal with the bullying and the violence on a daily basis. And since leadership will not be their voice, I will continue to be their voice. If the policy is changed to limit my time to 3 minutes, so be it. I will speak on other platforms wherever I have to go to be heard. Someone needs to speak up for the children. At the end of the day, I can lay my head down knowing I did what was right for the children. Can you all say the same? I don't think that you can.
Thank you.
And is it, Mr. Hitchens, I want to point out that the policy is changed on your school board website. It does say 3 minutes.
That is for the second reading. If you had anything you wanted to say, you were to direct that to the superintendent prior to this evening. It's stated at every board meeting.
Stating what the policy says on the website.
Right. Okay, next is, I may not say this right, Aaron Rosano? Rosano. Okay, Aaron, you are allowed up to 5 minutes to speak. Persons wishing to speak for a longer period must arrange for a place on the board's agenda. Persons wishing to be placed on the agenda shall inform the superintendent of the desire in writing and the topic no later than 3 full working days prior to the day of the regular meeting of the board, which is normally the third Wednesday of the month. Speakers may offer objective criticism of school operations and programs, but the board will not hear complaints about school personnel or other persons at a public session. Other channels providing for board consideration of complaints involving individuals exist and shall be used. The board president will have the authority to terminate the remarks of any individual who does not adhere to the above rules. Persons appearing before the board are reminded that although requests may be directed to the board, action and answers to questions must be deferred pending board consideration. Thank you. Go ahead. As soon as you speak, your time is starting.
Good evening. My name is Erin Rosano, and I'm a 7th grade language arts teacher here at Laurel Middle School. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stand up here as a teacher. I am a 7th grade ELA teacher here in the school district, or as a parent of a successful and well-educated child here in the Laurel School District. I really contemplated that decision. Then I decided that I couldn't just put one over the other, so here I am as both a teacher and a parent. By nature, I am an observer and a listener, and over the past year, I have been observing and I have been listening. I have watched many board meetings, and to be honest, I have heard some very valid concerns, but mostly, I have heard some huge misconceptions. I strive to not speak until I look at every perspective, and sometimes I fail. However, most of the time, I feel that I am successful. What I have concluded from my 12 months of observing and listening is both hopeful, yet hurtful. I walk into my school building each and every day filled with pride. I can honestly say that I work with some of the best administrators, teachers, and support staff who truly do want to make a difference. There seems to be a huge misconception about what actually happens in our schools. So I decided I wanted to publicly share just a few of the wonderful things happening in our building. Things that make this the place that I never want to leave, the place that I love. This is the place that I call home. I want to share these facts with you in hopes to dispel some of the misconceptions floating around. I realize that what I say may not change the minds of some. However, it is extremely important to me that I share why I confidently send my child to Laurel Elementary School every day, and why I can say with pride that I am an educator at Laurel Middle School. There have been policy changes, but did you know that the middle school principal, assistant principal, and guidance counselors worked relentlessly to lower the class sizes in our students' core academic classes? My largest class has 22 students, with the smallest is 16. This came with a sacrifice for teachers. Our planning period dropped from around 73 minutes to 53 minutes, but I haven't heard one single teacher complain about that change. That is because we know that lower class sizes are essential in meeting the needs of our students, and educating your children is important to us. I did not hear one teacher complain about the decision to not include asynchronous learning days for students in this school year's calendar. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. Many teachers expressed that they wanted their students in the school building. This also requires a sacrifice because many of us give up our planning period during the school day to collaborate with our colleagues to plan and implement high-quality instruction, which was what we were doing on those days when your children were at home. You may not be surprised, but many of our teachers spend their own money to provide the extra things that make our classroom a family. A couple of 7th grade teachers bought winter cookie decorating kits last December to make our last day of school before winter break a memorable one. I say this because I want you to know what type of environment you're sending your child to each day. So many of our teachers, support staff, and administrators stay at school after hours to provide experiences for your children. There is not enough time in the day for teachers to meet. Phew. I lost my spot. Oh, to plan field trips and after-school events. So we stay after school to do that. A few weeks ago, the middle school had a numerous number of staff members stay after to chaperone the back-to-school dance, and it was a huge success. Our library teacher is currently planning an engaging literacy night that will be held on the evening of October the 6th. Our phys ed teachers have planned and implemented many positive behavior incentive activities and field days. I assure you that this cannot be effectively planned during the school hours, so they stay after. I am sorry, but the constant negativity hurts. It hurts your schools, your children, my students, my own child, and honestly, it hurts me. Before I finish, I cannot ignore the elephant in the room. I cannot ignore the biggest complaint that is continuously spoken about: violence. So while there may have been an uptick in violence in our schools following the pandemic, we cannot ignore the fact that this uptick occurred in every public school district in the state. Most likely every public school district in the nation. And that rise in violence stems from the negative effects of the pandemic. It is absurd to single out one school district, or for that matter, any school district. The violence seen in schools directly correlates with the rise in violence that was displayed by the adults in our nation. Mental health issues are real. They should not be shamed, but they also should not be ignored. But we can't do it alone. So as a parent and a teacher here in the district, I respectfully request that we come together as a community. We come together for our students, our families, and our schools. We need to work together if we truly want what is best for our students. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
Thank you. Oh, financial report, I almost forgot. I guess that is important. Amy, did you want to get this?
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So since our last meeting, the accomplishments of the finance department, we completed our salary updates for our 10-month employees. And we have done many transfers and new hires for the 23-24 school year. We've completed our FY24 Perkins and Consolidated Grant updates. We have some appropriations that are ending at the end of this month, so we're making sure all those funds are spent before they are returned to the state. Our Citizens Budget Oversight Committee had their meeting on September 11th, and we were also awarded the Stronger Connections Grant. We received notice that we have received $1.17 million. This grant will be used to enhance communication between school and home to improve student attendance, hire a school resource officer, and expand our school constable program for after-school activities, hire a school psychologist and a licensed clinical social worker for mental health support, bullying intervention programs, and to reduce out-of-school suspensions and referrals. We will also hold evening parent meetings and enhance our partnerships with community organizations such as the Town of Laurel, One Laurel, Do You, Western Sussex Boys and Girls Club, the Laurel Public Library, and some others. Things we have coming up. We are currently in the process of our September 30th unit count. Our local funds audit for FY22 is also still in process. And we're still waiting on our enhanced MCI allocation that we can't receive until we have finished spending our FY23 allocation for regular MCI. And we also received some Filter First funds that plan for usage is due by January 1st. Here's a shot of our reserve and local fund in comparison to last year. Still maintaining trend. And that's the end. Is there any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, unfinished business. The second reading of policy BDDHR/KD-R, public participations at board meetings, as submitted and found on the district website in the Board of Education policy section and as found at the Laurel School District sites. Do I have a first?
So moved.
Second.
First, Mr. Isler, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler?
Approve.
Mr. Nichols?
Approve.
And Mrs. Pugh?
Approve.
So approved. Second reading, recommend reading of policy DFD-DFD-R and DFD-E1-4, rentals and service charges, as submitted and found on the district website, in the Board of Education policy section, and as found at the Laurel School District sites.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
Mr. Nichols.
Approve.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved. School choice. Recommend approval of school choice as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approve.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved. Fundraisers. Recommend approval of fundraisers as a group.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
Mr. Nichols.
Approve.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved. Recommend approval of fundraisers as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Pugh, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved. Rentals, recommend to approve request of Jamie Smith, Town of Laurel, for use of Laurel Elementary School bus parking lot on Saturday evening, October the 21st, from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. to host the Town of Laurel's Trunk or Treat. Certificate of liability insurance to be provided.
So moved.
Which one?
Sorry. Recommend approval with use of facility fee waived and custodial fee applied.
Second.
First by Mrs. Isler, second by Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
And Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
So approved. Recommend to approve request of Julie Snyder of Laurel Pop Warner for use of Laurel High School practice field, 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., and stadium following homecoming Saturday game at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. on Saturday, October 28th, 2023, from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. to host Pop Warner games for 6U, 8U, 10U, and 12U. Equipment requested and the scoreboard. Certificate of liability insurance provided.
I recommend approval with use of facility fee waived and custodial fee applied for evening games on stadium field. Second.
First by Mrs. Isler, second by Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
Second, Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend to approve request of Shantae Jackson, Pride Cheerleading, for use of the Laurel Middle High School cafeteria, middle and high school gymnasiums, wrestling room, and concession stand to host Delaware State Cheer Competition fundraiser on Saturday, February the 10th, 2024, from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Equipment requested is 7 tables, 20 chairs. Certificate of liability insurance provided.
I recommend approval with use of facility fee, custodial fee, and constable fee applied. Second.
Okay, first Mrs. Isler, second Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
And Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Professional trips. Recommended of professional trips as a group.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved. Recommend approval of professional trips as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh.
Approve.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved. PSAT dates, March the 14th and March 15th, 2024 for sophomores. Request asynchronous instruction for 9th, 11th, and 12th grade students for March 14, 2024 and March 15, 2024 as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approve.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approve.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend to approve SAT dates, March 21st, 2024, and March 22nd, 2024 for juniors. Request asynchronous instruction for 9th, 10th, and 12th grade students for March 21, 2024, and March 22, 2024 as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Isler.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approve.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approve.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Recommend approving the SB 186 Sussex County Voluntary School Assessment Laurel Board of Education Resolution as submitted.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approve.
and Mrs. Isler.
Approve.
So approved.
And just for everyone's edification, voluntary school assessment is an impact fee pretty much charged to residential developers when a development is built in a district whose capacity of their school buildings cannot handle the number of children that might be brought there due to that development being created. What we are doing tonight is supporting Senate Bill 186 in a resolution, and it will ultimately be up to the Sussex County Council. You can find any information about the VSA through a PowerPoint that Mrs. Horsey has put together on our website. Thank you.
Now we just need some developments to come and build within Laurel. Okay, first reading, policy IK, academic achievement recognition. Recommend first reading of policy IK, academic achievement recognition, as submitted and found on the district website in the Board of Education policy section and as found at the law school district sites. This policy will be available for review by the community at the law school district buildings and on the district website. Community input is welcome and should be directed to the superintendent of schools no later than Tuesday, October the 18th, 2023. It's 17th, October 17th, 2023. Okay, personnel, professional, recommend to approve the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment A.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote. Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
And Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Support. Recommend to approve the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment B.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols. Second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote. Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
And Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment C, coaches. Recommend to approve the personnel recommendation as listed in attachment C. I got hiccups. Hope I'm not growing. Okay, do I have a first?
So moved.
Mrs. Pugh, second, Mrs. Isler. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
and Mr. Nichols.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment D, cafe. Recommend to approve the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment D.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
and Mrs. Isler. So approved. Attachment E, administrator. Recommend to approve the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment E.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
and Ms. Isler.
Approved.
Attachment F, administrator. Recommend to approve the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment F.
So moved.
First, Mr. Nichols.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Pugh. Roll call vote, Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
and Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment G, recommend to, administrator, recommend to approve the personnel recommendations as listed in attachment G.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh. Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
and Ms. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Personnel attachment H, personnel. Recommend to approve the personnel report with regard to individual staff member competencies, is that right? And abilities as discussed in executive session.
So moved.
First, Mrs. Pugh.
Second.
Second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Pugh,
Approved.
Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
and Mrs. Isler.
Approved.
So approved. Okay, the next regular board meeting will stand as is. It'll be Wednesday, October the 18th, 2023, at 7 p.m. right in here. Do I have a motion that we adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
First, Mrs. Isler, second, Mr. Nichols. Roll call vote, Mrs. Isler,
Approved.
Mr. Nichols,
Approved.
and Mrs. Pugh.
Approved.
So approved, and I adjourn at 8:07 p.m. Thank you to everyone.
Thanks, everybody.